Pittsburgh Steelers fans, welcome to this episode of Steelers Touchdown Under. Mike Tomlin and the Steelers have made a change. It's bye-bye Canada. Eddie Faulkner and Mike Sullivan in to replace those offensive coordinator duties. We're going to unpack Mike Tomlin's press conference. We're going to look at what these changes possibly mean for the Pittsburgh Steelers as they enter this next AFC North matchup this week against the Cincinnati Bengals. Let's get straight into it. So Mike Sullivan, we know, is the quarterback's coach with Kenny Pickett. There, we know he has previous OC experience. He and Eddie Faulkner now are going to divide the offensive coordinator duties. Eddie Faulkner, though, becomes technically the offensive coordinator. Eddie Faulkner has been the Steelers running backs coach going back almost 4 seasons now, since 2019. Before that, he had a storied college coaching career. He coached at Ball State. He in a bunch of different roles across running backs, offensive coordinator, and running backs coach there. He was at Northern Illinois, where he was the special teams and running backs coach. He was the running back coach in Pittsburgh. He was the tight end coach in Wisconsin. He was the tight end fullback special teams coordinator in NC State. So definitely got a broad perspective on the offense, broad perspective and spectrum, not perspective, of the offense. And certainly where he has a gap, there's Mike Sullivan. Let's get straight into it with the Mike Tomlin's press conference where he made this news. So just to recap, the change was made and it came out across Steelers communications via, there was a statement on the Steelers website. Players weren't in the building. Kenny Pickett did happen to be in the building, but it wasn't an official day of player interaction in the building. It is a Tuesday. So that's one thing to be a bit mindful of. Second piece of it is that meant that he pretty much didn't get to call the players. He could only call the coaches meeting, determine what roles would be picked up and be picked up by who. And then he talked about the video that he does each week going in there that he had to go film. And then he also had, when he did the press conference. So it is early days. We're going to hear this unpacked. I did see an interview with Pickens there, which I, looked like it might have been in that locker room, but he talked about the, needing to get that that he did have a good chemistry with Kenny Pickett. So that's pretty big. But let's run through it as I reacted to it. Now, remember, Mike Tomlin press conference for me over here in Australia happens in the early hours of the morning. So I wake up 5, 6 a.m. I look at the press conference. I jump on. I come and recap it for you and how I feel about it. Do a couple of quick 5-10 minutes of background research to flesh out my points. All right. Eddie Faulkner, Mike Sullivan, we talked about them. One take, you kind of sit there and you feel, is Tomlin back? And then you kind of feel, did he ever really leave? Now, this is not going to be enough to placate some of you Steelers fans out there. I totally understand that. You do have to see there's a bit of positivity, or you've got to have respect for the fact that Mike Tomlin wants to absorb that heat. So that's up to you. Some people it'll be great. Some people won't be good enough. Other people will be like, he's done too much, being too generous with M.Canada. I like it because I've said that I feel, I've said it for, since middle of last year, end of last year, that I feel like Kenny Pickett is his loyalty is mistrusted or misplaced with M.Canada. So I'm glad that can stop now. I'm glad that Kenny isn't forced to choose between a personal ethic and what's best for his own progression on the team. Kenny still may not be the guy. Kenny's probably still not the guy, and the fans that think that this week. That's fine. But Mike Tomlin definitely said he absorbed it. He has absorbed that. And he's going to have to win out now to win some of the Steelers fan base and that credibility back. That's it. But what I do think this means overall with this change is that you bring in more of like Mike Tomlin used the word committee, but let's say a diversity of thought on how the offense should be run. And considering how well the run game is going, no wonder Eddie Faulkner has been promoted there, because at least we're starting. I wouldn't say we've got that necessarily down pat, but it's starting to take fruition. So he can focus a little bit elsewhere. There's less problems to fix compared to the amount of work that's got to go into Mike Tomlin. The amount of work that's got to go into Kenny Pickett and Mike Sullivan there, and Mike Sullivan prepping Mason and Mitch if anything happens to Pickett. That's a very important role. The question does remain, though, has too much damage been done to Kenny Pickett? Because ultimately, Kenny Pickett, and I'm glad this has happened now before the rest of the season, because I think it would be too much damage. Kenny Pickett's going to have to just show us over the next few weeks, particularly when they play the Titans, who are having their own issues, that not too much damage has been played, that it definitely is M.Canada that's been a problem, and that he can learn. But he has always talked about, even in his podcast with Big Ben on football, and he talked about the close relationship with Mike Sullivan. Therefore, I actually see that there might not be everything Steelers would love him more, but I do see this being positive. You get the positive of just making the change, and then you get the positive of Sullivan having greater control with Eddie Faulkner, and you also get not someone that's wedded to their own plays like M.Canada clearly was. If Mike Tomlin, there's a narrative out there that only Art Rooney can make this decision and fire them. Mike Thompson in the press conference was firmly his decision. If there is a level of they've got to get it cleared by Art, then my blame goes bigger to Art, and my take is that he actually finally let Tomlin do this, but we're never going to know that stuff. I also thought it was interesting. Mike Tomlin was asked a question about Kenny Pickett and whether the next 7 games gives an ability to evaluate Kenny Pickett's potential. That's what the question was asked about 15, 16 minutes into the press conference video on Steelers YouTube. Mike Tomlin said, I don't know that it does. Now, you can see this one of 2 ways. You can see this as, Pickett's better than what Canada's been doing. But the tone and the look on his face, I actually think Mike Tomlin isn't as sold on Kenny Pickett. I think he loves the intangibles. I think he loves the attitude. He did later say in the interview, they asked whether he'd be successful, and he talked about the fact that the guys that work hard generally see success. They generally see the fruits of that labor. But the way he said, I don't know that it does, it didn't fill me with confidence. And that's a storyline we're gonna manage that undertone. We're gonna keep abreast of that undertone. I did feel that Tomlin throughout his press conference stayed classy, and that's rare. So even if you hate him, classiness is something that a lot of society is missing these days. And remember, take out the fact this is the NFL. Defamation is a thing in this state, particularly in the United States, one of the most litigious, or the most litigious country in the world, the way the civil suits happen. And this is technically a layoff and a dismissal. We call that a dismissal in Australia. So, and you have unfair dismissals and those sorts of things. He's got to be very careful about what he says and tarnishing the reputation of M.Canada. That's also not Mike Tomlin's not going to go out and do that. He's not that guy. Even if you hate him, he's not that guy. He has that class. So, there's certain questions he isn't going to ask. So if you felt like he dodged some questions, I actually don't think he did. I thought he was more candid than what I expected him to be honest. The other thing too is that this coming game is a much bigger game for Kenny than I actually think he might even realize, because the Canada excuse doesn't fly. Maybe he gets a slight breather in terms of the Eddie Faulkner and Mike Sullivan coming in into that first game. But it's now on Kenny. Like, you got to prove it, mate. This is ACC. It's more important than the ACC championships, than more ACC finals. Getting Pittsburgh the ACC title. You have got to go down there now, down the stretch, and win and prove that you're worthy of being the number 1 quarterback going into next year. I think he can do it, but we need to see it, and not in the 4th quarter. We need to see this in quarter 1, 2, and 3. Now, I don't expect him to go out there in the next 3 or 4 weeks and put 4 quarters straight together. That ain't going to happen with Kenny Pickett, with what we've seen, and him being in his 2nd year. But if we could see 2 or 3 quarters out of 4, a couple of weeks in a row, might make you feel a bit better. I also now hope we see Pickens and Freemuth have a day. I couldn't believe how poorly they used Freemuth last week. Then there was a tip. Jeff Hartman from Steel Curtain Network happened to say that he had insider sources on a YouTube short. He had insider sources that Freemuth would have a big role in the offense. I didn't see a big role in the offense. And that's not on him. That's not on Jeff. That's not on Jeff's source. That's on Canada. But I don't know how you don't use one of the best tight ends, the top 5, top 10 tight ends in the league when they're healthy on their day. I just think it's ludicrous. I think this decision comes because Mike Tomlin, I think it's obviously been a very long time coming along, some long suffering for everyone involved in the Steelers community, fans right through to the tip of the spear, the organization, through to Mike Tomlin and Kenny Pickett. But it's very clear that he is not thrilled. Like, it's not acceptable that we lost last week's game. There was a question asked about the fact that what they were able to do with the Browns and just shut them down. And he talked about the fact the Browns aren't going to, they were asked about how many points he scored. And he said, well, the Browns aren't going to score many points when they're throwing it, because there was asked a question about TJ, that TJ had raised about them getting the ball out in, less than 2.7 seconds every time, 2.1 seconds. And Mike Tomlin said, well, they're not going to score a lot of points that way. And that's exactly right. But the Steelers didn't score enough points. So Mike Tomlin, clearly, this loss hit him in a different way. And I'm glad it did, because it hurt all of us as Steeler fans out there. So I'm actually really happy about that. I do have to say, shout out goes out to Jenna Harner, who is regularly Obviously does some TV reporting. I'm going to mix up the station WK, but regardless, she also is on Chris Carter once a week with Locked On Steelers. She asked a really great question toward the end of the press conference. I really loved it, which was like, what did you get when she asked about whether Tomlin had a chance to speak to Kenny when they bumped into him, and he sort of said no, it was just more chin up. I am buoyed by the fact that Pickens has said recently that he and Kenny Pickett have the chemistry. That leads me around the play calling. Clearly, with Deontay frustrated, there's a lot of undertones here. But I will say one thing about the press conference. I found it very interesting. Nothing was said about Najee Harris. I feel it very interesting that no one asked a question about Najee Harris. And so it leads me to believe that perhaps Najee Harris's frustration has been with the play calling. He was a team captain. He does have a lot of respect and reputation in the building. He is frequently gone to as someone that, can provide their, insights, not just in terms of what they're doing overall, what they're doing, but the overall, how they're playing. And so for him to be that frustrated, and the other thing too is in terms of Warren, they're still gonna play the two backs. So I think actually having more balance there is really key. Who jumps in and at what moment? Those things I don't think Canada ever really got right, to be honest. But Eddie Faulkner clearly has been able to somehow get that right and see the benefits there. And I think we're going to see that even more now that Eddie Faulkner's in charge. I think it actually says a lot about Najee's comments, that Najee makes those comments. We may see the change with Canada. Eddie Faulkner's brought in, as I say. I'm not saying that's all done to placate Najee Harris. No, sorry. But, I mean, if this was 2 weeks into the season, the Steelers were just 2 weeks into the season, but it was mid-season, perhaps they look somewhere else, but we're past that point now, in terms of where they're bringing OC in. But again, you can't shake up the whole playbook. That'd do even more damage to Kenny, probably, with what we've seen on the field. So I do think it's an interesting situation the Steelers find themselves in. But ultimately, when you are the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team that is used to winning, you cannot play offense and score the lack of points that the Steelers have scored. And that's something that Mike Tomlin literally called out. They were asking what one of the big reasons was, and he said lack of points. Now, the Steelers scored 7 points in week 1, 26 in week 2, it looked better, 23 in week 3, so then they're 2-1. They scored 6 in week 4, if you remember, against the Texans. Then they go 2-2. Then they score 17 against the Ravens, so they don't break 20. They've broken 20 4 times. 4 times this season. 5 times this season. But in those times, they've had the wins in all 5 times. But they struggle to score the points regularly, and they've not scored more than 26. The fact they don't have a 30-point game in there, we know that goes back years. We know they haven't had a 400-yard game. That goes back, 58 games now? Not good enough. But when you're single digits in 2 games of a 10 games you've played, when you've scored 10 points 2 other times, so you've scored 10 points or less in 40% of your games this season, that ain't going to win you. That ain't going to win you an AFC North title. It ain't going to get you into the playoffs. Well, maybe barely. And it's certainly not going to allow you to have a playoff run. And that's what this team needs to be about, regardless of who's on that roster. That's the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's the brand that it is. So, look, in wrapping this up, honestly, I think the Steelers get better from here. How much better? That's a wait and see question. Whether it's enough to get them, with 7 games to go, whether it's enough to get them 3 wins or 5 wins or more than 5 wins, we'll see. I think 3 is the bare minimum, and we get to 9. That's the bare minimum pass mark. Obviously, that's what's needed for an over 500 record. But this team, I still think, with that defense, with just a 10% improvement, 20% improvement, let's go with 20% improvement in offensive production and points, this team can win another 4 or 5 games. And then close out the year, you make the changes, you go through another good draft class, you fix some glaring holes. There are holes at linebacker depth. I'm sorry, that. We got lucky when Quan was playing so well. Otherwise, we had 2 decent, we had Cole Holcomb's great. He's a 2A or a 1B. He's not like a top 10 linebacker in this league. Atlanta Roberts has got very fixed skill set. They don't have enough support at strong safety. They've got to go, or just decide you're going to play in left and right safety probably as permanently. Just make those decisions, but they've got to, there are a number of areas they can get better in. I'm not sold out on the season. I'm not selling out on the season, but the Steel fans, let's be realistic about this. let's not be in the doldrums. I mean, you're going to see a lot of people like, oh, even if, let's say they lose this week, oh, everything's over still. It's not over. Or we've got the rest of the season. Why you can finish with double-digit wins, I don't see the season as over. But I'm just glad they made this change because for a lot of us, it's long-suffering and it really sucks. Anyway, hope you liked the show. If you did, hit the like button. If you are not a sub to us, hit that sub button. We do have a goal of getting somewhere between 500 or 1,000 or even more than 1,000 subscribers by the end of the season. That's the goal we're working hard to do here. That's our goal. That's the points we want to put up here. And as always, go Steelers.